Remember this shocking case out of Florida? An armed man held up a woman at gunpoint, carjacked and kidnapped her in broad daylight, then killed her and set her ablaze. Multiple men were arrested in connection to her murder, but it was her husband's arrest that opened the floodgates to what really happened that fatal day. I'm Elizabeth Millner with Law&Crime. Now, we've been following this case since that startling video was released. Her murder unpacked so many twists, but in new court documents we've obtained, there was a shocking reason she was miles away from her home in South Florida in the first place. On April 11th of last year, Katherine Aguasvivas drove from her home in South Florida to Winter Springs, which is near Orlando, hours north. She was at an intersection in Winter Springs when suddenly someone knocked on her car window. A bystander captured that moment on their phone and showed what went down. You can see a green Acura behind Katherine's car, which was in the far left turning lane at the intersection. A masked gunman opens her driver's door, then hops in the car. Once the light turns green, her car makes a U-turn, and the green car follows closely behind her. Investigators say the gunman ordered Katherine to drive to a construction site, and at that site, that's where she was shot and set on fire.
About a half a mile or so prior to that intersection, she started to notice that the green Acura was behind her, and the Acura was actually ramming into her back bumper at that time. At that time, she picked up the phone and called her husband, told her husband that she was being rammed, that there was somebody there that was following her. The husband provided the advice to don't stop anywhere. There are no known reports to the sheriff's office or policing authorities made by either Katherine or the husband that we're aware of. We are again still putting together to try to explain a motive. There's no criminal history here for either Katherine or her husband in the United States. There's no clear indicator why somebody would do this, why would they target them. But we do feel and believe because she was being followed, they were watching that. She called her husband. Husband said, don't leave the car. No reports to law enforcement that this was not a random act of violence, that the perpetrators knew exactly who they were going after. Why they're going after them is something that is a part of our ongoing, continuing investigation at this time.
Now, at the time, the Seminole County Sheriff's Office revealed Katherine noticed the green Acura was following her for a while, so she called her husband, Miguel. The investigation revealed shocking details that we didn't even see coming, like that Katherine drove from her home to collect $170,000 in drug money, and she was supposed to deliver that money to her husband, Miguel. So let's unpack that. According to court documents from December of 2021, literally up until the day Katherine died, prosecutors say her husband conspired to launder money and has aided and abetted in money laundering. They point out several instances of Miguel dropping off large amounts of money to be laundered in the form of cryptocurrency. Even in some cases, he worked with accomplices. Prosecutors allege he laundered at least more than $1 million in drug proceeds. So how is that tied to Katherine? Well, on April 11th of last year, when Katherine drove from her home in Homestead to pick up the $170,000 for her husband, she was supposed to pick it up from Giovanni Crespo Hernandez, who had the money at his girlfriend Monescabel's home. But when she left her home, Giovanni was hatching a plan to rob her, even calling up another man named Jordanish Torres Garcia. So Katherine arrived at Monescabel's home at 5:13 p.m. that evening. She left a little more than 10 minutes later at 5:28, this according to court documents. And just a few minutes later, she called her husband Miguel. When the gunman tapped on her window, she was on a FaceTime with Miguel, and he could see that she was terrified. Prosecutors say the phone then disconnected, and he being Miguel, couldn't get in contact with his wife again. From there, we know what happens next. But here's what else we've learned. At the time of Katherine's murder, the DEA had an active and ongoing investigation into Miguel for money laundering. Their investigation revealed he was a money courier who had picked up drug money in Central Florida, then would drop it off to a money launderer. But here's the thing. The money launderer was actually an undercover DEA agent. So on the day of the murder, the DEA was expecting Miguel or another co-conspirator to drop off the money. But that deal was canceled because the money was stolen during the carjacking/murder. When investigators interviewed a witness who is known in court documents as cooperating witness 1, that person was a close friend of Katherine and confirmed Katherine was engaged in money laundering at the direction of her husband and 2 other co-conspirators. Katherine's friend revealed to authorities Miguel was historically involved in drug distribution and even paid his wife $1,000 per trip to pick up the drug money. This witness revealed Katherine made over 10 trips to Orlando to pick up the money. The unnamed witness also revealed Katherine and Miguel were separated at the time of her death. Miguel was helping Katherine pay her rent by giving her a chance to act as a courier in his whole operation. In the days following Katherine's murder, the witness was with another co-conspirator when a news story came on about Katherine's murder. And the co-conspirator allegedly said, "And to think that that was my trip. If I say the whole truth, I'd have to put people in the middle of it. It hurts me." But nothing obligated her. But as far as the arrest made for Katherine's murder, that happened by June, when 4 men were charged, including Giovanni Crispo Hernandez, Giovanni's girlfriend Monisca Bell, Jordanish Torres Garcia, and 2 other men, Kevin Ocasio-Justiano and Derek Rodriguez Bonilla. Monisca Bell was arrested in a sting operation after a package of coke, and not the soda, was delivered to her home. In September, she was indicted on drug trafficking conspiracy, possession with intent to distribute controlled substances, and possession of a firearm in furtherance of drug trafficking charges. Her boyfriend Giovanni is the suspected ringleader and mastermind of robbing Katherine. He was also indicted on charges including drug trafficking conspiracy, carjacking resulting in death, and kidnapping resulting in death. But he's not accused of pulling the trigger. That person was allegedly Jordanish Torres Garcia. The Seminole County Sheriff said his detectives have evidence Jordanish bought the green Acura used in the carjacking, which investigators say was used in another shocking crime, the murder of a tow truck driver. He was also indicted by a grand jury on several charges, like arson, kidnapping resulting in death, carjacking resulting in death, and drug trafficking conspiracy. The alleged driver of the green Acura is allegedly Kevin Justiano. Now, in January, he agreed to a plea deal where he would plead guilty to charges including aiding and abetting a carjacking resulting in death and aiding and abetting a kidnapping resulting in death. Another suspect, Derek Rodriguez Bonilla, was allegedly recruited by Jordanish to help with the robbery and carjacking. After Katherine drove to the construction site, Derek met up with Kevin Ocasio-Justiano to get a firearm, and the gun was used to kill Katherine before her body was set on fire. Now, he was also indicted for carjacking resulting in death and kidnapping resulting in death. And that's just scratching the surface because more were charged as well, but the full extent is unclear. As far as Katherine's husband Miguel, he was charged too, but ultimately conspiracy to commit concealment money laundering. He ultimately worked out a deal with prosecutors in the case to plead guilty, and he'd only face a max sentence of 20 years in prison. And considering the totality of all that happened, seems like a sweetheart deal to me. There are so many layers with this case. Let's break it down with Florida-based criminal defense attorney Kesia Early. Kesia, thank you so much for joining me today. You know, I remember last year when this case first unfolded, and there was this question lingering about why Katherine was up in Seminole County when she's reportedly from Homestead. She had no ties to Seminole County, but now we're learning she was in the area because she was collecting drug money essentially for her husband. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I remember when this case first came out last year, and it was absolutely horrible. Thank goodness that there was some footage captured by the driver behind. So essentially, the driver captured this carjacking and robbery from their cell phone. And what we saw was that it was a lady, and we kind of we're not used to this, right? They had their rifle style weapons, and then a few hours later, we discovered that her vehicle was burnt up. But that was all the information that we had. Later on, it was discovered, as you mentioned, that throughout this investigation, it was discovered that her estranged husband or ex-husband at the time, I know that they were separated, he was giving her $1,000 each way to assist with her funding of her rent and other utilities. So these were one of her several trips, but this particular trip had a hefty amount of money. She was supposed to collect $170,000, bring it back and get her cut. And unfortunately, she lost her life. When you're dealing with drug cartels, when you're dealing with money, drugs, all of this illegal activity, it never ends well. And this was a major story here in South Florida.
Yeah, and it was just startling to really see that footage because one, it was captured in broad daylight. Two, there were witnesses around, and just reading through the court documents and just the fact that she was even on the phone with her husband when they had tapped on her window and she was telling him how scared she was. I just can't even imagine going through something like this. And these men who are a part of the scheme to conspire to kill her by robbing her, when you see the footage and it's again in the middle of the intersection, there's witnesses around, then they burn her body nearby. I assume either to get rid of the evidence or even just send a message. But what are your thoughts on the level of just brutality exuded on her?
It's a combination of both. So let's break down a conspiracy. You had 3 men. Obviously, they were in the getaway car and they were a part of this armed robbery and carjacking. And they all conspired to not only turn over the funds, but then, in essence, rob her and kill her. They eventually burned the vehicle with the hopes of getting rid of all of the evidence. But we know that with the advancement of technology, they were not only able to trace the calls, but also trace the victim back to her husband. And they eventually were able to apprehend him through an undercover DEA agent. I don't think so much it was to send a message. It was more of when you're dealing with drug users, drug dealers in this evil scheme, it was really greed that motivated them to utilize the scheme to gain 170 plus thousand dollars. And we know now that the husband in this case, he's facing up to 20 years in prison, along with the fine due to his continuous involvement with the drug cartels, taking this money, the money laundering, and possibly transferring it to cryptocurrency to kind of defraud and conceal this illegal activity.
Yeah, and when we talk about Catherine's husband's role, even in her murder, he was indicted on that conspiracy to commit concealment money laundering. Under his plea deal, he faces a max sentence of 20 years. First, what is conspiracy to commit concealment money laundering? And do you think a judge will accept this deal?
Well, let's go with the last part of your question. So, oftentimes you have the plea negotiations between the prosecutor and the defense attorney. But just as you stated, sometimes it's up to the judge to either accept or reject that deal. So, there's a possibility based on the brutal way that this victim died and the amount of money and the length of time, the continuous numerous trips that were made doing this drug deal, there could be a possibility that the judge will reject this deal and say, you know what, I think more time is warranted to deter other criminals from committing these acts. And when you're talking about conspiracy, you have two or more people conspiring, planning, coming into agreement to commit this crime of utilizing money, whether it was illegally obtained or obtained in various manners, and concealing that money so that they would avoid taxes or concealing this illegal activity to utilize and generate further revenue to fund their illegal activities. So there could be a possibility that the judge will reject it and require the parties to go back in their plea negotiations and agree to more time.
And when we talk about her and the amount of money that she was making each and every trip, it doesn't seem like, in a way, that it was a lot of money. $1,000 for what the risk really is, especially when you're transporting so much money. In your thoughts, though, do you think that her husband unintentionally put his wife in harm's way, offering her $1,000 per trip, but at the same time, that is so much money. You can see why some people would take matters into their own hands sometimes.
Yeah, I don't believe that her husband at the time, when she was making these numerous trips from Homestead to Seminole County, knew that this would be the final outcome. I think that as the trips went along without any issue, it became easier. Maybe the parties let their guard down and figured, you know what, this is quick money and there's no high risk associated with it. And to us, $1,000 may not be a lot, but to the victim in this case, we know that she didn't have a lot of money, so making $1,000 round trip or each way, that substantially assisted her with paying her rent and other expenses, and not to agree with this activity, but maybe that was her mindset. And it's unfortunate because, again, the horrible outcome, the violent way that she was murdered, apprehended, murdered, and these defendants tried to conceal any evidence. I mean, they're definitely facing a lot of time for this brutal attack.
Do you think it clicked for him in his mind? And I know we can't read his mind right now, but do you think it clicked for him what was happening? Because Catherine was on the phone with him when someone tapped on that window.
I'm pretty sure it did, because you're talking about a hefty amount of money. The evidence have not been revealed as to whether or not this was the biggest amount, but that is a lot of money. So I really believe that when she was on the phone with him and she told him that she was scared, I'm pretty sure that that resonated with him. But unfortunately, he was hundreds of miles away, couldn't do anything. But and then he didn't even participate in the investigation because he knew that it would eventually lead back to him. So although he might have feared for her, he didn't care enough to participate in the investigation. possibly because it would have exposed his illegal activity. But eventually, we know that he was caught throughout their investigation.
Yeah, and even when this was going on, the DEA was already investigating him. And so when we talk about investigations, and obviously a lot of people watch a lot of television shows and it moves a lot faster than it actually does in real life. But in terms of, when federal authorities, or in this case, the DEA, when they do these types of investigations, they do take years for the most part. But do you think had they charged a little bit sooner, maybe Catherine would still be alive?
Here's the thing, I do a lot of drug trafficking cases, and oftentimes you don't have enough with that first undercover sting, that what they tend to do is allow you to buy, sell with an undercover several times so that they can continue to build up their case. Because a criminal justice system is meant to punish, right? So they want to make sure that they get these dangerous, violent criminals off the street. So as opposed to arresting you, let's say for one drug transaction to an undercover DA, we're going to set you up because you're looking at minimum mandatory sentences. Here in South Florida, let's take traffic in fentanyl, for example. Anything over 28 grams, you're looking at a minimum mandatory sentence of 25 years. So if you set that sting up 3 separate days, 3 separate occasions, you have a guaranteed a rate where the defendant most likely will take a plea as opposed to gambling with their life on one case. And I believe that this was the instance here. They had to make this continuous relationship with these undercovers. You have to build the relationship so that you can catch the bait.
And even when it comes to the other men who actually pulled the trigger against Catherine and were involved in the carjacking, they're already facing a mandatory minimum as well too, but theirs is life in prison. When it comes to these big scale drug cases that involve money laundering, and in this case we have carjacking and murder, we have all these different violent elements here. But do you see these types of cases pretty often?
I do, and it's unfortunate here in South Florida. I don't know if it's the location. We have all these drug cartels. Unfortunately, statistically, South America, you have the drugs coming in by boat, by plane. So it could be location. It could be the fact that it's prevalent and people are desperate, and as opposed to getting a job the legal way, they resort to the easy money that leads to lengthy time. So it's we're seeing it more often, but we're also seeing the legislator taking action and making these minimum mandatory sentences higher to deter the constant influx of drugs, the constant influx of crime that typically results from this type of activity.
And it's just so sad too, because Catherine lost her life, probably thinking that she would make some easy money, at least to kind of sustain herself a while she's going through that separation, and then to lose her life in just such a violent, horrible way. It's just a tragic, tragic case. Casey Early, I want to thank you so much for your time and your insight. Before we sign you off, though, where do you think is going to happen when the judge kind of looks over these court documents? Do you think it's going to be that 20 years, or do you think it's possibly going to be more or even less?
It could possibly be more because they can always amend the information. They can amend the charge and document, add on more as their investigation continues. And there's a possibility he's going away for a very long time. And then he also has to face the mandatory fines that's attached to this. So even if he gets out, it's going to be very difficult for him to recuperate because of the fines, probation, and the lengthy sentence that he's facing.
And I think the fine is even just hundreds of thousands of dollars there. Casey, again, thank you so much for your time today. I always appreciate your insight into our cases. Hope to see you soon.
Likewise, thanks for having me.
A judge still has to sign off on Miguel's plea deal. In addition to his sentence, he's also facing a fine of $500,000. Now, if the other men are convicted in Catherine's murder, they do face a mandatory minimum of life in prison or even the death penalty. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.